Hi everybody, and thank you for joining us today for the 8th of our roundtables. My name is Doug. I'm one of the co-founders of Intelligent People, and if you don't know us, we're a specialist product recruiter with close to 20 years experience recruiting product talent up to board level. We provide both permanent and interim services, contingency and exec search, and this includes product ops, product design, product management up to CPO level. Please do go to our website to see our current live roles. It's intelligentpeople.co.uk. The theme today is how to transition from CPO to CEO. And we have three speakers who've actually done this and are going to share their thoughts and insights for anybody else who's looking to take the next step in their career. Our guests are Anna Jakomovska. Anna is the CEO of Culture Trip, and she'll be focusing on how a CPO can shift from a product-centric perspective to a company-wide strategic vision. We then have Gregor Young. He's the CEO of Guild. Gregor will be focusing on how to develop a strategic vision, identify market opportunities, and prioritising the initiatives for strategic growth. And we then have Lucy Stonehill. Lucy is the founder and the former CEO of BridgeU, and Lucy will be discussing the essential hard skills needed for a CPO to become a CEO. So the first session is called Broadening the Lens, expanding the focus beyond product to business leadership. Our main speaker is Anna Jakomovska, and we should be getting a graphic coming on screen quite shortly. So this looks at some of the key skills that people will need, understanding the full remit of the CEO, which is obviously somewhat broader than that of product. That includes being a representative for the business, a leader, a manager, a financial head, a troubleshooter, a creator, and also a recruiter. Good afternoon, Anna. Thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you to everybody who joined the panel at this point. I'm doing very well. I'm excited about the discussion, and I'm very excited also to hear what the other speakers will have to say on this topic.
Great. Would you like to give us just a quick introduction, and then the forum is yours?
Yes, absolutely. So I am Anna. I am the ex-CEO of Culture Trip as my last engagement. I've exited the startup that got acquired in April last year. I have been at Culture Trip for 4 years, started as a VP of product for content, became Chief Technology and Product Officer, became Deputy CEO, then CEO, then actually did a management buyout of the business and exited. So it's been quite a sort of packed couple of years being at Culture Trip. Prior to that, I was in senior product positions in mostly media companies. I was director of product at The Guardian, head of product at Sky News, BBC, Channel 4, ITV, so a lot of media experience. And before that, I've completed a PhD in AI before it was cool. And the people who were interested, I could kind of count on two hands how things have changed. I have a computer science as a background, and I've also done a master's in computer science and business.
Wow. Okay. So your remit today is to expand the focus from beyond product to business leadership, and it's a journey you've taken personally. So would you like to maybe talk us through it?
Absolutely, yes. Product management is my favorite role. Out of all the things that I've done, I have personally found myself most doing everything that a product manager needs to do. I do think the product manager is the CEO of the area that they're looking at or looking after. So there's a very natural transition between all the things that a product manager needs to do to grow a product, to keep the engineering team essentially interested, to keep kind of looking at KPI, define a KPI and a vision for their group, and keep a relentless execution. So everything that you've shown on that graphic places very naturally to all of product management. But I would say, from my experience, and again, obviously it's a experience of role of one, which was quite intense. But I'm sure it differs in different areas. So I can only sort of represent the things that I've learned through it. In general, companies are about growth and risk management. And what the product management discipline does very well is the growth part. Even if it is, doing efficiency type of features, it is still kind of within the umbrella of a growth of a company. And what I find that potentially where we can do as a discipline, but we don't articulate it particularly well, is the risk management. That is my perception as to why sometimes chief product officers lose out to the chief financial officer or to the chief revenue officer. And in that sort of context, I think the reason for that is probably the history of product management. When I started off, I was either reporting into marketing and I was told, how to move this button here to have, bigger conversion, or I was under content or under technology. So it was always seen as an add-on function. And I think the product community, helped by the Silicon Valley sort of tutors and books and rock stars that came from that area, fought incredibly hard to establish the discipline and establish it at an exec level. And that is just, to my personal huge satisfaction, a huge win. And we do have a product officer at the moment. What has happened, I think, within that sort of almost existential fight to prove that it's a discipline on its own with a deserving of the exec board, we have articulated the growth very well, but we haven't articulated well enough the ability to manage risk, and that is from a legal compliance risk, and actually take decisions which might feel counterintuitive to growth, for example.
Okay, I mean, it's interesting because you're right. Product really is a discipline that's been around, being called product for maybe 20 years. It's a relative newcomer, and the switch to being product centric is something that's really only happened in, I guess, the last 5-10 years. And we have seen CEOs come through from product, but they've normally been the innovators and the founders. So Steve Jobs, he's a product guy, designer at heart. I suppose Zuckerberg, etc. So when you talk about understanding risk and legal compliance, how can people learn that? Where would they get that experience? Where did you get that experience then? And
it's a good question. You're right. Just going back to your point, you can be a CEO if you found your own company, regardless of the discipline. And I guess what I was referring to is a lot of these incredibly capable people that I know, my peers and my colleagues and people who I mentor, are going through bigger companies where there's bigger opportunity to learn the product discipline and the data is there. And what I was referring to is more within that context, how they can kind of grow through the ranks and potentially achieve that sort of transition from a chief product officer to a chief executive officer. I think risk, there's not a manual to say this is how you do risk, but I think that every product person inherently understands risks, because they do know the risks to the features that they're or the products that they're launching. Some of them are, if you look at content moderation, that is riddled with legal and other types of compliance challenges. The point that I'm making is essentially, from my example, when I took over Culture Trip, I had to get very quickly up to speed on everything that surrounds the risks of actually sending people on trips. And it was something that throughout my product discipline I've never learned. And I remember sitting at a health and safety briefing, and the opening sentence of the tutor was, "People on trips die, and they will die." And I was thinking, oh, great opening. What do you do? And, then there's a whole raft of sort of safety procedures and procedures on crisis management that are very real life situation that has nothing to do with shipping great products. It has to do with how do you prioritize empathy? How do you prioritize calming the families of people? We had people when the earthquake in Morocco happened, they were on the ground. We had passengers on the ground.
Okay.
And in that sense, if something would have happened to some of those passengers, as a single director of the company, I could have been legally and criminally prosecuted. And I think that is you cannot learn that, but I think it's more about being open and to a certain extent forgo the agile methodologies and the KPIs in situations where that is necessary, and actually just learn to surround yourself with fantastic people who have experience in managing these type of very serious situation, and be their partner and collaborate and empower them and enable them to do the best that they can be, and somehow, in a way, follow their lead until you have sufficient experience to kind of find efficiency or to change some things for the better. So I think what is missing with it, that was the context in which I was talking. What is missing in the conversation is product leaders can demonstrate that transition easily. They're very smart people that know how to collaborate, know how to understand the psychology of relationships. It's just they're not given the chance, and I think it's useful within the career development activities that they're taking is to actually be part of a team that has nothing to do with product.
Okay.
That is crucial to that particular domain, where they can learn and articulate very well, if they are going for a CEO position, their approach when it comes to risk management. Because if I'm a board of a company and I've got my chief finance officer who deals with risks all the time, and I have a area of the company that could bring down the whole company if it's not managed very well. It's a difficult toss-up between somebody who knows how to grow digitally and somebody who can actually keep the company safe while enabling the growth within the product people. And I think those are the difficult discussions that boards are making. Whereas, if you're on an evil sort of footing with the growth and the risk, then I think product folks can be absolutely unstoppable and absolutely brilliant CEOs, as we've seen many examples of that happening.
Yeah. And what about, so a lot of that's about collaboration, moving out of your own, I guess, function to understand how the business operates in a broader sense. How about things like managing financial metrics, business performance? How key would you say? You're smiling, so I guess that's pretty key.
Very key, very, very key. And I would encourage also for personal finances sort of sake, which I found has helped me greatly, is to do a basic financial course for execs.
Okay.
Because it puts a really different lens on things. When you're a product person, I guess, from my experience, motivation is to empower the people to use the latest technologies to grow, and then potentially sort of reap the revenue from it. When you are in a financial kind of reviewing the financials of a company, it's a very different story. Where sometimes, I would look at the technical people and the technical cost, and there would be a big replatform project which will take 2 years to do, and the company really can't afford to do that. And I would understand why, disappointingly, the decision would come to the sort of product and tech team to say, we cannot do this replatform. You'll still need to work on the old platform, which might be substandard and not ideal. But there is a harsh reality to the finances, and I think understanding those and finding the right pragmatic balance between keeping the teams happy and actually keeping the company in the most financially stable way is paramount. Without that, it would be very, very difficult to successfully run a company.
So that's really, so you're suggesting product leaders try and understand more about financial sustainability, how that fits into company goals, as opposed to just what do I need to make product grow?
Absolutely, yes. I think different companies have different ways of funding themselves, and obviously startups have limited run rates, but corporates have different targets in terms of satisfying shareholders. The board and the CEO will be under a terrible amount of pressure to either extend the run rate so that more things are developed and more growth is shown to investors or potential investors, and the corporates would always want to kind of maximize the shareholding for their shareholders. The tension will always be there. I think it's more around how you find, how you understand, and good CEOs over time become very aware as to where they can enable capital expenditure, and where they need to just pull it back and focus on sort of more short-term type of goals. And it will highly depend on the company. I mean, we've heard that Spotify, after, was it 18 years, of a reported profit this year for the first time. I think very few, yes, that was in the news just a couple of days ago. There's very few companies that can afford in this day and climate that amount of growth without being profitable in investment. That's sort of a different kind of era investment. And you know, we just need to, I think what I would say is whoever's aspiring to be a CEO needs to be probably a little bit more caught up with the current harsh realities of the financial environment, and be smart about capital expenditure versus kind of OPEX and growth for the business. And I think it's absolutely doable. It just takes a little bit of experience to actually get kind of this fine balance right.
Yeah, interesting. So how would you, because there is a key thing, and we see it sometimes with fundraising, how would you go, or how would you advise people to get exposed to building investor and shareholder confidence?
As a CPO or as a CEO?
Well, I guess as you've probably got to learn it as a CPO to become a CPO, I would have thought, but yeah, either really.
I think with investors, I mean, the basic principles of product would not go amiss. They're tried and tested, the classics, very clear KPIs across the business, not just in digital. So if my KPI is, you know, in a completely different area of the business, of a certain, you know, achieving a certain goal, clear KPIs, clear expectation of when those KPIs would be met, and very timely communication. That is what every good product person should do, or I know they do within the context of their the engineering team and that they work with, and there's wider stakeholders. It's pretty much the same principle, and it works. So for that, I think all the aspiring sort of CEOs or product people who want to talk to investors, it's they're already equipped. And I think also what the product discipline has with that sort of growth mindset is painting an incredible, exciting future in the next 5 years, which I don't think, you know, if you're in a more risk-averse type of function, such as, you know, in finance, it's very difficult to paint where the future will be. Probably it is fine to kind of plot and graph based on the growth of the business, but there's something around quite special around the storytelling that every product person I've met knows how to do, and exciting whilst showing that there's a great pace to deliver towards, you know, whatever that goal or North Star might be.
Yeah, do you know what? That's a really good point, because I think a lot of the time, you know, CPOs I speak to, because they feel like kind of the new kid on the block a little bit, they maybe forget that there's some USPs to coming from product, and the storytelling and the vision and the growth it's incredibly appealing to shareholders and investors. So yeah, I'm really glad you touched on that. What about then balancing innovation and operational efficiency, which is a bit of a slightly drier subject, but yeah.
I don't think it's dry at all. I think it's tough, right? It depends on the company. I think if the company has a very clear operational goals, you know, to reach this many subscriptions, to sell this many items, you know, whatever the goal is, and it's very clear for reasons that are articulated in a sort of best possible way, and there's no clear, very huge market threats, then innovation for the sake of it might be quite difficult to push through. There are periods in the company when you just need to deliver that, whatever's been achieved and agreed. Innovation in its own term is a long-term investment, right? And I think that needs to be discussed and enabled as such within the next 5 years. We're going to trial and probably fail, but we will try and make this work. And so there needs to be probably within the budget and within the sort of goals of the organization. This is operationally where we're going to be. It will satisfy our run rate. It will satisfy our shareholders. And this is the sort of long-term part of the business where we will probably fail, but it will take some time to get to the next sort of accelerator for the business.
Okay.
And I think in terms of articulation, this is how I would go. But in terms of the sort of who gets involved, I would absolutely cross-pollinate between the two in terms of the talent that sort of works on those two streams, so to say, because that has always harnessed the highest returns, in my view.
Okay, cool. So I guess we're kind of coming to the end now, Anna. So in summary, you would say you think it should be relatively doable for a CPO to move into a CEO role if you focus on the core basics of KPIs, the storytelling, and make sure that you get out of the comfort zone, learn new skills, and learn about other areas of the business like operational risk.
Absolutely. I think I'm such a huge kind of supporter of CPOs running businesses because the discipline is brilliant, that people are smart. The bits that, as you said, need to learn can be easily learned. And if I was any board, deciding between a CPO and any other role, I would always go for a CPO. But that's my biased nature. But I haven't seen any CPO that hasn't been given a chance that has not sort of smashed it. So I think go for it is my last message of today.
Oh, brilliant, Anna. Thank you very much for your time. That's really appreciated and really like your insights. Thank you so much.
Lovely to chat. Thank you.
No problem. So next up we have Gregor Young coming in. Gregor is the CEO of Guild, and he will be covering from execution to vision, driving the company's long-term strategy. And again, we should be getting a graphic on at some point. There we are. Thanks, Mem. So this is effectively what they call the strategy pyramid. And if you start at the top, you've got why does the organization exist? What's the vision? What is the mission? What are the values? You then have got the how, so you have the why, but how do you achieve that why? That's the how. And that covers goals and strategy. And then underneath that, you've got the what. So what's your action plan? What are you actually implementing? Gregor, great to have you on. Perhaps you give us a quick minute to introduce yourself and then we can crack on.
Hi, Doug. It's great to be here. Thank you very much for having me on. So I'm Gregor Young. I have had a long background in product, many years at large businesses, including BT, Channel 4, Financial Times, various product leadership positions. And in 22, I transitioned into startup. I became CPO of Guild, which is a community and networking app business. And after 6 months, I made the transition into CEO. So I was CEO there for about 2.5 years.
Okay. So I guess the first thing is, with you, we're looking about defining and driving the company's long-term strategy. So we've got a couple of different sections, but how would you transition from, as a CPO, doing execution of product to actually setting the strategy and the vision for the company?
Well, it's about moving up that pyramid you just showed. A CPO, obviously the most senior product person in the business, and a very large business. You're very senior, and you will definitely be getting involved in setting vision and strategy a lot, and not executing very much. If it's a smaller business, you might be getting involved in all of the whole kind of top to bottom of that pyramid. Mm-hmm. However, as a CPO, you're ultimately taking a lead from a CEO. So a CEO will be responsible for setting that ultimate vision and setting the tone for the way that the business needs to move forward. And as CPO, you should be working from that, taking from that, and developing it further within your own domain. So I think. Anybody who's operated as a CPO will have done this, will have experience doing this, but you're moving into a position where you're sort of stepping up a level. You're broadening it a lot more across more domains. It may have more kind of impacts and permutations in different parts of the business across different disciplines. But fundamentally the skill set is still the same. And historically, product managers have always been sort of referred to as the CEO of the product, and I think there's a lot of truth behind that. The skills that you develop even at a an entry-level product manager role all the way up through the levels of seniority, you're always developing the ability to sort of own your domain, set strategic direction, make priority decisions that are in line with the strategy that's been set. So you're always developing that discipline, and so it's very doable, just like I'm saying, to make that transition. It's just across different domains, and that's tricky because they might be domains you don't know anything about.
Well, and speaking on that, I guess it brings us on to the actual, operational management. How do you sort of scale your brain and skill sets as much as anything else to deal with things like sales, marketing, finance, sort of domains that you may have worked with the stakeholders and colleagues, but you're actually now running?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely helps to have had some exposure to this in the past.
Yeah.
I'm lucky, working in big businesses and having done product in the sort of the old-fashioned sense. I was very involved with commercial. Sometimes I was running my own P&L. Sometimes I was having to do business cases or ask for budget on an annual basis. Whereas nowadays, product teams, product management, product leadership might actually be enjoying persistent funding, for example, so they may be more protected from some of these things. I feel quite lucky that I was exposed to a lot of these things. So I definitely recommend anyone who's looking to make this transition is to find ways to expose yourself to these other parts of the business, like finances, like marketing, sales, things like that, in any way you can, because it definitely, stepping into that CEO role definitely helps to have had exposure to it. But then further to that, I guess, is having the, humility, self-awareness to understand, what strengths and skills do you bring and what gaps do you have? You need to be honest about that. And I think reflecting on my transition into that CEO role, I felt really confident that my product discipline that I developed lent myself really well to being able to develop processes, being able to develop things like frameworks, strategy, measurements, leveraging data, all these types of things. They're very, very transferable and very relevant, and also not particularly well established in some of these domains. And then further, being just understanding, what you're not particularly good at, and being able to allow your colleagues, the people that are maybe, I guess, working for you, who are ultimately responsible for those domains, well, not ultimately responsible because you are, but they look after that domain for you, that they're able to bring their skills to bear, and that you're able to sort of complement each other. Being a good leader is always about having good people around you that sort of know what they're doing and know what they're talking about. You certainly don't. We shouldn't expect to be able to trump everyone for know-how, that's for sure. But it's about knowing what kind of qualities can you bring that can help them do their best work. And I think one of the most important things that I certainly felt like I have developed as a product manager, and I definitely think it's something worth, if you've got a lot of product managers tuning in now, the sort of thing that they should reflect on is their sense of scalability, because especially when you're in a growing business, or you're focused on a startup environment, understanding what's scalable and what isn't scalable and developing an instinct for that is particularly important, and that applies particularly well in a product space, and you develop that very keenly, because that's a lot of what product is, right? It's about saying, well, how can I serve 1,000 people a minute with this 2 lines of code or a particular design? Similarly, if you're all of a sudden responsible for customer service operations that you've never worked in before, you want to be able to identify, for example, where your customer service people, they just want to do the best by their customers, but you want to be able to say to them, well, you're doing a really good job of helping people, but you couldn't do that 1,000 times. Or if we suddenly doubled our business in the next month, you wouldn't be able to keep doing that. So developing a sense of what's scalable and helping the teams set themselves up in a way that we can grow efficiently and effectively.
Yeah, and I guess hiring in as well. So if you're thinking, so what you're saying is you have to think of impact. So if we want to treble revenue over the next year, what do we need to do to cope with that? Do we need 3 times as many contact center people? Okay, can we therefore afford to do that in the UK, or do we move it overseas? Have I actually done that? Do I have the time to do it? Do I need to bring in someone in ops or operations or chief of staff to help do it? That type of thinking.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of new challenges, definitely you're presented with.
Yeah.
You've got lots of levers. That's the thing. Like as a product leader, your levers are all inside the product, and you probably know the product better than anyone. When you're the leader that's responsible for it, and when you have challenges or things that you need to do, you've got to decide, well, what lever am I going to pull? When you become CEO, your levers are in different places, and one of the things, I guess, one of the things that I was reflecting on earlier is that, and I think I definitely experienced this, was a sort of a difficulty with moving away from being the product person, was that you often think that the product is going to be the thing that's going to solve all the problems. We've got this market gap, or we've got this scalability or this operational problem, but if we just change that piece in the product or develop that new feature, maybe it would fix it. And it's your go-to lever. But in reality, sometimes it's cutting costs. Sometimes it's hiring new people. Sometimes it's getting some external support or different sort of sales and marketing approach. So it's being much more open-minded and ready to act across different domains and not just solely relying on your product sense.
Interesting, yeah. And so how do you do things like develop competitive strategies? So for example, in product, obviously you're doing market research all the time, but that's about, is there a gap in the market? What's our competitors offering? I guess as CEO, how do you look to position the company effectively against competitors, industry trends, what might happen in 5 years? That sort of thing.
Yeah, you've got to have your eye on the market, and that's definitely something that's a little bit different to being the product leader. I think, like I said, the product leader, you take a lead. This is the market we're going to go after. This is the domain we're going to go after, and it's up to you to figure out what features and things like that. And you're very concerned about users, whereas CEO, I think you're much more concerned about the wider industry trends and what shifts might be happening over the next few years, and what kind of things can we anticipate to move into. And you've got to make some of those big bets. I think something that's quite tricky, and certainly I experienced early on, was how you develop your differentiation, your market differentiation, especially when you're a relatively new business. There's a tricky balance to find between meeting user needs, which is obviously a massive sort of product mantra that's drummed into us all. Listen to your customers, do what they tell you. Yes, but if you do that too much, you can just end up looking like everyone else. So if you're in public sector developing, service design, yes, absolutely do what your users need, because you're just there to deliver a service well. But if you're trying to differentiate yourself as a commercial entity, you do have to develop niches. You do have to operate in gaps, and sometimes that means not necessarily doing what everyone's asking you to do, actually delivering something in different ways. But then if you're too different and too niche, you alienate users. So there's a tricky balance to find there. And I often found, we had a lot of internal debates about, whether we should develop, feature parity with our competitors, because you'd find in sales conversations people saying, oh, well, I'm used to using that thing and you don't have it, or so-and-so's got one of those, why don't you have them? And it can be very, especially when you're young as a company and you maybe have a insecurities about your positioning and your differentiation. It's very easy to sort of try to follow, but finding that confidence to be differentiated, just finding that balance can be quite a tricky one. And then I guess lastly, the last point there, I guess I'd say is moving from CPO to CEO. You've got to think more broadly about like go-to-market strategies and selling this thing. I think there are some product people, and I think I've probably been guilty of this in the past, where you think the best product, as long as you build the best product in the world, it will sell itself, and that's just not true. You could build the most wonderful product and it might just sit there languishing because people don't know about it, or it's not priced correctly, or it's not being positioned correctly in the market, or you don't have the right right routes to market. So I think having a bit of sort of openness and humility around that sort of thing as well, and learning that your product needs to be sold, and having quite a keen focus on positioning, pricing, go-to-market strategies, things like that, even though you maybe come from a place where you're used to sneering at that.
Sorry. Yeah, no, I know. I remember vividly, some BlackBerry users saying about how much better the BlackBerry was than the iPhone when the iPhone first came out, and how technically superior. And it was really obvious to me that it had just died. So, it's a good point. And again, I think your bit about USPs is interesting, because if all you do is the same as the competitors, your sales team's got nothing to sell on but price. So you have to make bets on certain new features, certain differentiators, and you've got to kind of hope you get them right, or be ready to pivot if you haven't. What about things like initiatives for growth? And again, this ties back into, I guess, making bets on differentiation. But how do you look at things like initiatives for different growth and balance it so that you can kind of make sure you're winning, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, well, my specific experience in this is that very early stage startup, and I'll be honest, we never really cracked product market fit. So a lot of our time was very short term decision making about trying to achieve growth. A lot of it was sort of zigzagging around and pivoting to try and find something that was going to make the difference for us. And so there was a lot of short term. It's about balancing your short term decision making and where you invest your focus versus long-term plays, I guess. They're all ultimately going to help you. And there were a lot of long-term things that we wanted to do that we just couldn't do. And so, for example, and some people might balk at this, but there was quite a strong feeling that we needed to develop an ESG strategy for our business. And I just had to put it down and say no, because we need a business first. And then we'll ESG strategy for that business, but we actually need a business first, and at the moment we don't really have one. So whereas developing a data warehouse and reporting capabilities was something I absolutely invested in the long term, because I knew that was just something that was just going to help us grow ultimately. And if we did get through a tricky period, that's something that's going to be really, really important to us when we get to the other side. So it was about making these sort of decisions between what's the really important short-term things to hit the kind of numbers we need to hit in the short term, whilst making some very critical decisions about what we're going to need really in the long term. And otherwise, I think growth really comes from focus. And as a CEO, it's really important that everyone in your organization is pulling in the right direction, because if people aren't pulling in the right direction, that's the sure way to hamper your growth. Okay,
Gregor, that's really, really insightful. Thank you very much. And honestly, a lot of the things you've talked about, I mean, I'm not a CEO, but as the owner of a small business, it resonates, balancing the short and long term, kind of taking bets on things and following hunches. So that's really insightful. Thank you so much. And our next guest is going to be Lucy Stonehill, who is the founder and former CEO of BridgeU Learning. Hi, Lucy.
Hi, Doug.
Just before we intro you, we should have another graphic coming on. And this is learning and development. So the essential hard skills for a CPO to become a CEO. And you'll see on the left, hard skills are things like proficiencies in foreign languages, certifications, degrees, etc., machine operation, computer programming. I mean, these are pretty basic things, but they're just examples of what we call hard skills. Whereas soft skills are things like leadership, time management, teamwork, communication, flexibility. I guess emotional intelligence people would probably define it. So Lucy, great to see you again. Perhaps you could give a quick overview for the people watching, and then we can kick off.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks for having me, Doug. It's been fantastic listening to Anna and Gregor. And I should say I'm the only CEO who was not a chief product officer. So hopefully I can bring a slightly different perspective here, although I was the founder. So inevitably I spent some time thinking about and immersed in product in the early days of BridgeU. So lovely to see everyone. I'm the founder of BridgeU, as Doug was saying, and was the acting CEO of that company for 10 years. That was an education technology student recruitment marketplace that ended up operating, serving secondary schools in 145 odd countries, and also working with who wanted to reach and recruit across that network of talent in all of those different countries. So built the company, raised venture capital, and then in 2020, BridgeU was acquired by Kaplan, which is one of the world's largest and most diversified education providers, employing about 10,000 people globally. So then had the experience, of course, of stepping into a role running BridgeU, but as a business unit within this much wider company environment. I served on Kaplan's global leadership team from 2020 through to May 2024 when I stepped down as CEO of BridgeU. Over the course of running BridgeU, scaled the business to over 100 employees at peak across a number of different regional hubs: UK, Spain, Colombia, the US, Dubai, Hong Kong, China, and I currently sit on a number of boards and do advisory work.
Great. So, I mean, your perspective is going to be really good because as opposed to somebody who sort of, this is what I did to grow into a CEO, from a CEO's point of view, what would you say from the outside looking in, what skills do you think CPOs or the CPOs you've known, where do they need to build? What skills do they need to add? I'd love your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo a lot of what Anna and Gregor have said. I think, the key transition is one of expanding from product leadership to overall business leadership. Yeah. As a product leader, you're largely focused in, as Gregor was nicely saying, on kind of your universe, which is delivering value through product innovation, ensuring your team is following the right process, building with, I think, the dual objective of customer satisfaction and business understanding and meeting business objectives. And I think the CEO role fundamentally demands a much broader perspective. You're now responsible for aligning every aspect of the business and ensuring the entire organization functions cohesively as a single unit to deliver on its collective objectives. So, of course, what that means, to Gregor's point, is you have more levers, but it also demands of you as a CEO that you need to grow into understanding more of those kind of core functions. I think, to your point about hard and soft skills, Doug, from my perspective, I think probably one of the biggest transitions is, or I would imagine would be one of relationships. Your new number one team is the leadership team. It's not your own management team. At BridgeU, our VP of Product managed engineering, product, data, and design. And so your new number one team is the most commercial senior person, the most senior finance or operations leader, the person in charge of customer support or customer success. So I think resetting that expectation within yourself and critically within the context of that new leadership team is probably one of the biggest tactics I would suggest. I think the other thing, of course, and Anna nicely touched on this, I think developing a much more robust sense of financial acumen And I was not I was a 25-year-old founder with probably not much business being a founder, as most 25-year-olds are. And so I would not suggest that the CEO of a startup or a scale up, again, I think bigger companies and business units have a different requirement, but I wouldn't expect that a new CEO would need to have a very deep understanding of finance in the traditional sense of interpreting balance sheets, income statements, and cash flow reports. You have a head of finance for that, or frankly, even a finance controller will be able to manage those particular parts of the area. I think new CEOs or newly kind of minted CEOs like CPOs, I think, need to be very well versed in the unit economics underlying their business and the drivers of variable cost, revenue. And so, CEOs, again, a lot of CPOs already have an experience managing a budget, I think, or a P&L. As a new CEO, you're simply extending this. And I think, again, I'll come back several times over the course of my, advice or the information I have to share to say that you have a leadership team to rely on who can help you. You're not expected to know everything. And so I think coming back to that number one team, relying on them to guide you and leveraging their functional expertise, I think, can be a really, really important part of growing into that position. And then the final point I'd make on this is I definitely agree with Anna. I think, particularly as a founder CEO, one of my strengths, which was a strength in signing up early customers, in hiring talent, and raising capital, was this sort of more, I guess, sort of optimistic view about what was possible. And I tend to agree that a lot of the product leaders across different levels that I've met, sort of share that strategic vision. And so I think you've got to probably lean into that as a real strength. The best product leaders I've ever come across have always grounded their quarterly roadmap in, as you showed earlier, Doug, sort of the company's strategic vision, mission, which then informs annual goals, which you can structure through OKRs, KPIs, a number of different frameworks, which then informs a quarterly plan and a roadmap. And I think, as the founding CEO, I kind of leveraged a very similar sort of framework in order to communicate and align sort of different timeframes and different objectives across the business.
Yeah, good. Yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of product people we speak to, they're very comfortable and used to dealing with pretty much every internal department, including customer success, but not necessarily finance. And maybe that's where you have to get a really good FD or similar and sort of get them to manage you for the time being, and until you can learn some of the intricacies of it, really. What about things like mastering stuff like boardroom comms?
Yeah. I think this would probably be a greater area of learning for someone in that transition, in that role. I think it definitely is an art, learning how to, or an art and a science, I suppose, learning how to communicate business strategy and financial performance to the board. As CEO, you do need to communicate both the company's strategic direction, as we were talking about before, but of course also performance against the plan, clearly and confidently articulated. I think, again, I in the way that I always built board packs and led my board meetings, I always think the right thing to do is to involve the key members of your leadership team, your number one team, to pull together that well-rounded picture of business performance. I think the key thing is understandably, the board will expect the CEO to highlight, but also critically understand the problems that they're bringing to the board. And so again, some of that comes down to spending time with other parts of the business and really understanding the challenges that they face. And again, you can always bring, often when we had a particular challenge at the time, I would bring in a member of my leadership team to offer a deep dive into that particular problem. You as the CEO don't need to speak the entire time. You can tee up a member of your team, but I think the board needs to feel of course, that they have, you know, confidence in your understanding of the challenges that the business is facing. I think, just to add a couple of points. Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, it's sort of slightly good old-fashioned advice. I mean, gaining trust generally is whether that's with the new product manager in your team or whether that's with you know, the investor director on your board, you know, often is through relationship building, good old-fashioned relationship building. I think being transparent and consistent in your behavior. You know, I think using one thing that most product leaders, you know, should already be well versed in is using data to back your decisions. Be upfront about the challenges, and of course, you know, make sure to highlight the successes. I think some of that transfers very nicely to sort of boardroom dynamics and investor shareholder management. And then, you know, one thing I think is also important is alongside routing some of your updates to the board with data. You know, I think something that I would imagine would be more of a challenge for a product leader is actually knowing when to really back the qualitative assessment or the qualitative insights that you're able to glean from your role or from your team. You know, I do think, you know, it's important, I think, for CEOs to not be to lead with conviction, to have a perspective on the market. And sometimes data doesn't point to a single clear direction, or sometimes it's not sufficient, or as Gregor was saying, sometimes you're too early stage to actually have a really complete picture. So then I think it's about leading with conviction, and sort of, you know, becoming comfortable with taking that perspective, and leaning into that course of action.
It's good. So this is it's interesting because sometimes from the outside looking in, you sort of think, and we see this in sort of films where CEOs kind of bluff over the problems to sort of, you know, win the board. Is there a time when, as a CEO, you have to say, we have this problem and I kind of have this opinion, actually I need help though?
Yes, and sometimes I have turned to the board for that, but to be honest, Doug, you know, more often than not, I've turned to my own leadership team. You know, I think it is your role as CEO to make sure that your number one team is as good as it can possibly be, given the size and the constraints of the business and the unique requirements of the business. And so, you know, I don't, in my experience, I don't think the boards, again, perhaps with the exception of non-investor directors, so more operational directors who you bring onto the board, who have particular operational expertise. I think that's an exception. But I think if most of your board members are generalist investor directors, you know, they're not perhaps going to be there. They're certainly not going to give you the answer. Perhaps what they could do is leverage their own network and the fact that they're on a multitude of boards to offer a perspective. But you know, by and large, I've tended to find that with those really kind of nutty problems where I don't know the answer, you know, the best thing I've done is gotten my whole leadership team in a room for a day and really tried to deeply understand it, leveraging, again, the variety of perspectives and experiences in that room. And then sometimes just saying, we're going to have to make a decision one way or another. And, you know, let's not let good be the enemy of great.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's good. So, but again, it's about being honest.
Yes. Okay.
What about things like identifying new market opportunities? Again, it's something product people, they do market analysis, but as a CEO, where's the sort of the differences?
Yeah, I think this again would probably be one of the bigger areas of differential. Although again, probably also depends on the product leader and to what degree, as you say, they're used to being kind of in front of customers. I think you know, CEOs do need to have a very deep domain expertise and deeply understand the problem space, the industry that they're operating within. I think, of course, as you know, product leaders are probably used to doing, this means spending a lot of time with the internal customer-facing team, sales, customer success, support. But I think this also requires spending a lot of time with actual customers, which in some cases, again, my business was a B2B2C business. You know, in some cases, that would mean getting on the road, you know, going to Dubai, attending a conference where you can meet 20, 30 schools and spending your time actually, you know, interacting with you know, with those clients, those customers. And again, that sort of very external facing, getting on the road, going to conferences. I really have found that to be extremely valuable, because it's not just the actual customers and prospects that you'll meet at those events, but often you'll meet other companies, perhaps even other CEOs who are also serving a similar market segment. And that group also became a very important peer group for me, I should say, over the years, because you can then, as you build trust with that group, you can often exchange views and perspectives on the market, and you can then get this, even more sort of zoomed out view on whether the challenges you're encountering are unique to you, or whether they're perhaps more market specific. And I think that sort of, even more sort of zoomed out lens on the market is a very important perspective to bring back to your internal teams, but also, as we were talking about before, Doug, to be able to share with the board.
Yeah, good. And what about building company culture and leadership? We hear a lot about this in product. What about sort of scaling that up, though, and getting the company culture and leadership beyond just the product organization?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people obviously say culture starts at the top. And so I think, how you as the CEO and how you operate with your leadership team, of course, sets the tone. Again, having a strong sort of mission-driven culture attracts good talent, retains good talent, and can, of course, also sort of drive performance. I think what's easier said than done is articulating that back to the company and helping. There's mission and vision is very easy to state. I think tying that into a near-term plan and strategy, which becomes tangible and actionable for every individual and every team, I think is much, much more challenging, but is, again, where frameworks can be very good to use. And sometimes it's practice makes perfect. I think, again, one big transition for the role we're talking about, from product leader into a more generalist sort of MD, GM, CEO type position, your leadership then becomes not about inspiring just product vision, but about inspiring the entire sort of organization, and having a clarity of vision that can carry you through the next 1, 3, sometimes even 5 years. And I would probably, I think there's probably a benefit, even more so in the early months, perhaps, of transitioning into a role, a more general leadership function, where you spend time with the functional leaders who perhaps are most alien to your functional work or your historic functional work. And then even more than that, Doug, probably spending time with their team, and using the insights that you're able to glean about their work to then publicly highlight and I think celebrate their success. People will knowing that you have a product background, that's probably an area where you have an intrinsic bias. So perhaps I think there could be something to be said for sort of being very, very clear about how you're going to counteract that in the early days of stepping up into a new role like that. And then, again, back to the hard skills, soft skills. In my experience is that employees across all levels are most engaged when they see and they understand how their work impacts company performance. So I think ensuring transparency about company goals, regular communication about how each team's work feeds back into those goals, and then, during tough times, as inevitably they will happen, leading, I think, with empathy and not being afraid to be vulnerable, I think is something that certainly I found I was able to endear team members to me during the inevitable rocky periods that you'll have as a CEO.
Lucy, that's amazing. Thank you very much. I think we've about come to the end, but again, I wanted to thank you so much. Thank all of you for joining us, and we hope to speak to you again soon.
Likewise. Thanks, Doug.
Thank you all. Everybody, the full video and transcript will be on our website shortly, and also on YouTube as well. Thank you very much.